When Romania entered World War II on the side of the Axis powers in June 1941, its armored forces represented a curious mixture of obsolete French designs, captured Soviet vehicles, domestically modified tanks, and eventually German equipment. Romania's journey through the Second World War was complex and ultimately tragic, beginning as Germany's ally in Operation Barbarossa, fighting bitterly on the Eastern Front, and then switching sides in August 1944 to fight against its former German allies. Throughout this turbulent period, Romanian armored forces evolved from a small collection of outdated vehicles into a more substantial force that included both foreign acquisitions and indigenous designs. The story of Romanian tanks during World War II is one of improvisation, adaptation, and the harsh realities faced by a secondary Axis power with limited industrial capacity. From the French Renault tanks purchased in the interwar period to the desperate domestic conversions created as the war turned against the Axis, Romanian armor tells the tale of a nation caught in the maelstrom of total war. This comprehensive examination will explore every tank type that served in Romanian forces during the Second World War, from the light reconnaissance vehicles that probed Soviet defenses to the tank destroyers that attempted to stem the Red Army's advance. We will discover how Romania's geographical position, industrial limitations, and shifting alliances shaped its armored forces, and how Romanian tankers fought in some of the war's most brutal battles, from the plains of Ukraine to the streets of Budapest and the fields of Transylvania. This is the complete story of Romanian tanks in World War II. Pre-war and early war light tanks. Renault FT-17. Romania's armored tradition began with the iconic French Renault FT-17, the world's first modern tank featuring a fully rotating turret. Romania acquired approximately 76 of these pioneering vehicles during the early 1920s, making them among the first tanks in Romanian service. The FT-17, designed near the end of World War I, weighed only about 6.5 tons and was armed with either a 30mm Puteaux SA-18 gun or an 8mm Hotchkiss machine gun, depending on the variant. Romanian FT-17s included both the cannon and machine gun versions, providing a mix of capabilities. The tank's armor ranged from 8mm to 22mm, sufficient against small arms and shell fragments, but vulnerable to anti-tank weapons even of the 1920s and 1930s. Powered by a 35-horsepower Renault engine, the FT-17 could barely reach 7 kilometers per hour, making it painfully slow even by interwar standards. The crew consisted of just 2 men, a commander who also served as gunner and loader in the cramped turret, and a driver positioned in the hull. By the time Romania entered World War II, these tanks were hopelessly obsolete, their riveted construction, thin armor, and minimal firepower no match for modern anti-tank weapons. Despite this, Romanian forces retained FT-17s for training purposes and occasionally employed them in rear area security roles. Some sources indicate that a few FT-17s saw limited action during the initial invasion of the Soviet Union, though their combat effectiveness was negligible. The primary value of these ancient vehicles lay in their role as training platforms for Romanian crews learning the basics of tank operations. Romania maintained these tanks throughout the war, and they represented the foundation upon which Romanian tankers built their skills, even if the vehicles themselves were museum pieces by 1941. Renault R35. The Renault R35 represented Romania's attempt to modernize its tank forces before World War II. Romania ordered 41 R35 tanks from France, which were delivered between 1938 and 1939. This light infantry tank was a significant improvement over the ancient FT-17, though it too was becoming obsolete by the outbreak of war. The R-35 weighed approximately 10 tons and featured superior armor compared to the FT-17, with up to 45mm on the frontal surfaces, making it reasonably well protected against most anti-tank rifles and light anti-tank guns of the period. The tank was armed with a short-barreled 37mm SA-18 gun, the same weapon used on some FT-17 variants, along with a coaxial 7.5mm MAC 1931 machine gun. This armament could defeat most light vehicles and fortifications, but struggled against other tanks, particularly at longer ranges. The R-35's main weakness was its speed and mobility. Powered by an 82-horsepower Renault engine, The tank could manage only about 20 kilometers per hour on roads, and its cross-country performance was poor due to its narrow tracks and high ground pressure. The two-man crew arrangement, identical to the FT-17, proved problematic in combat as the commander was overwhelmed with duties. Romanian R-35s saw extensive combat during Operation Barbarossa, serving with Romanian cavalry divisions and mechanized units. These tanks participated in the initial invasion of Bessarabia and subsequently fought in Ukraine and southern Russia. Romanian tankers quickly discovered the R-35's limitations when facing Soviet armor. The 37mm gun could penetrate the armor of early Soviet light tanks like the T-26 and BT series at close range, but was ineffective against the T-34 and KV-1 heavy tanks that began appearing in greater numbers. The R-35's slow speed made it vulnerable to being outmaneuvered, and its thin side and rear armor could be penetrated by Soviet anti-tank rifles. Despite these shortcomings, Romanian crews fought tenaciously with their R-35s, and the tanks provided valuable infantry support during the early campaigns. As the war progressed and losses mounted, the surviving R-35s were increasingly relegated to training and security duties, replaced by captured Soviet tanks and German-supplied vehicles. Renault R2. Closely related to the R-35, Romania also operated a small number of Renault R2 tanks, an export variant developed specifically for foreign customers. The R2 was essentially similar to the R-35, but featured some minor modifications based on customer requirements. Romania acquired approximately 34 R2 tanks, which supplemented the R-35 fleet. These vehicles shared the same armament, consisting of the 37mm SA-18 gun and coaxial machine gun, and similar armor protection. The R2's performance characteristics closely match those of the R-35, with comparable speed, mobility, and operational limitations. Romanian forces employed R2s alongside R-35s in the same units, and they saw identical service on the Eastern Front. The distinction between R-35 and R2 variants was largely academic in Romanian service, as maintenance and operational procedures were nearly identical. Like the R-35, surviving R2 tanks were eventually withdrawn from frontline service as more capable vehicles became available, though some remained in service for training and garrison duties throughout the war. Skoda LT Verzena 35. The Czechoslovakian Skoda LT Verzena 35 represented Romania's most capable light tank at the start of the war. Romania purchased 126 of these excellent vehicles from Czechoslovakia before the German occupation of that country in 1938 and 1939. Known in Romanian service as the R2, which can cause confusion with the French R2 variant, these tanks were designated AH-4 in Czechoslovak nomenclature, but commonly called the LT Verzena 35. This light tank weighed approximately 10.5 tons and featured significantly better performance than the French tanks in Romanian service. The LT Verzena 35 was armed with a 30mm Skoda A3 gun, a superior weapon to the French 37mm, offering better muzzle velocity and penetration. A secondary armament consisted of two 7.22mm ZB Verzena 37 machine guns, one coaxial and one in the hull. The tank's armor ranged from 12mm to 35mm, providing reasonable protection against small arms and shell fragments, though inadequate against most anti-tank weapons. What set the LT Verzena 35 apart was its mobility and mechanical reliability when properly maintained. Powered by a 120 horsepower Skoda engine, the tank could reach the speeds of 40 kilometers per hour on roads, making it one of the faster light tanks of its generation. The suspension system, while complex, provided good cross-country mobility when it functioned properly. However, the LT Verzena 35 had a significant weakness. Its pneumatically assisted steering and transmission system was sensitive to cold weather and required meticulous maintenance. Romanian crews operating these tanks on the Eastern Front frequently encountered mechanical problems, particularly during the brutal Russian winters when the pneumatic systems would freeze or fail. The three-man crew, consisting of commander, gunner, and driver, was still less than ideal but an improvement over the two-man French tanks. Romanian LT Verzena 35 saw extensive combat during the invasion of the Soviet Union, serving with the 1st Armored Division and other mechanized units. These tanks proved effective against Soviet light tanks and infantry positions during the initial advances of 1941. The 37 mm gun could penetrate early Soviet tank armor at reasonable ranges, and the tank's speed allowed Romanian units to exploit breakthroughs and pursue retreating enemy forces. However, encounters with T-34 and KV-1 tanks were disastrous, as the Czech 37mm gun could not penetrate their frontal armor even at close range. The mechanical complexity that plagued the LT version 35 in German service affected Romanian units as well, with many tanks lost to breakdowns rather than enemy action. Despite these issues, Romanian tankers appreciated the LT version 35's superior performance compared to French tanks, and maintenance crews worked tirelessly to keep them operational. As the war progressed and losses mounted, the surviving LT version 35s became increasingly rare, with some being converted to other roles and others cannibalized for spare parts to keep the remainder running. Captured Soviet light tanks, T-26. The Soviet T-26 light tank became one of the most numerous types in Romanian service through battlefield captures during the invasion of the Soviet Union. Romanian forces captured hundreds of these tanks as the Red Army retreated in 1941, and many were pressed into Romanian service after repairs and modifications. The T-26 was based on the British Vickers 6-ton design and existed in numerous variants, though Romanian forces primarily captured the later single-turret models armed with a 45mm gun. These tanks weighed approximately 9.4 tons and featured armor ranging from 6mm to 25mm, with the thickest protection on the frontal turret face. The 45mm 20K gun was a significant improvement over the 37mm weapons on Romanian and most other light tanks, capable of defeating contemporary tank armor at typical combat ranges. A coaxial 7.62 DT machine gun provided anti-personnel capability. Powered by a 90-horsepower engine, the T-26 could reach about 30 kilometers per hour on roads, with reasonable cross-country mobility. The three-man crew consisted of commander, gunner, and driver, a standard arrangement for Soviet light tanks. Romanian forces valued captured T-26s for their firepower advantage over French and Czech light tanks, and the abundance of ammunition and spare parts captured from Soviet depots made them attractive for continued service. Romanian maintenance crews became proficient at repairing damaged T-26s, and organized units of captured Soviet tanks were formed within Romanian armored divisions. These tanks saw continued service with Romanian forces throughout the Eastern Front campaigns, participating in fighting around Odessa, in the Crimea, at Stalingrad, and in the Caucasus. The T-26's thin armor remained a significant vulnerability, as it could be penetrated by most anti-tank weapons, but its 45mm gun allowed Romanian crews to engage Soviet light and some medium tanks with reasonable confidence. Romanian-operated T-26s were often marked with distinctive identification symbols to prevent friendly fire incidents, including large white crosses or Romanian national insignia. As the war continued, T-26 tanks became increasingly obsolete even by Eastern Front standards, but Romania continued operating them due to equipment shortages. Some captured T-26s remained in Romanian service even after the country switched sides in 1944, fighting against their former German allies. BT-7. The Soviet BT-7 fast tank represented another important type captured by Romanian forces during the 1941 campaign. The BT series, derived from the American Christie design, featured a revolutionary suspension system that allowed the tanks to operate either on tracks or on wheels alone, though Romanian operators rarely if ever used the wheel-only mode. Romanian forces captured significant numbers of BT-7 and BT-7M variants, which differed primarily in engine type. These tanks weighed approximately 13.8 tons and were armed with the same 45mm 20K gun as the T-26, along with one or two 7.62mm DT machine guns, depending on the variant. Armor protection was similar to the T-26, ranging from 6mm to 22mm, making the BT-7 vulnerable to most anti-tank weapons. What distinguished the BT series was its exceptional speed and mobility. Powered by a 500-horsepower engine in the BT-7M variant, these tanks could exceed 50 kilometers per hour on roads and maintained good cross-country speed thanks to their Christie suspension. This made BT tanks ideal for reconnaissance and exploitation roles. The three-man crew operated in cramped conditions, typical of Soviet light tanks of the period. Romanian forces recognized the value of captured BT-7 tanks, particularly for cavalry and reconnaissance units that could exploit their speed. The mechanical complexity of the Christie suspension initially challenged Romanian maintenance crews, but they adapted quickly. Romanian BT-7s saw service in the same campaigns as captured T-26, providing fast-moving support for advancing infantry and conducting reconnaissance missions. The main limitation of BT tanks in Romanian service was their fuel consumption, as the powerful engines required significant amounts of gasoline, which was increasingly scarce as the war progressed. Despite this, Romanian forces operated captured BT-7s throughout the Eastern Front campaigns, appreciating their mobility even as their armor and armament became increasingly inadequate. T-60. The Soviet T-60 light tank was captured in smaller numbers by Romanian forces, primarily during 1942 operations. This diminutive vehicle weighed only 6.4 tons and was armed with a 20mm TNSH automatic cannon and a coaxial 7.62mm DT machine gun. The T-60 represented a simplified design intended for mass production, featuring welded armor up to 35mm thick on the frontal surfaces, making it better protected than earlier Soviet light tanks despite its small size. The two-man crew, consisting of commander, gunner, and driver, limited the tank's effectiveness in combat due to crew overload. Powered by a 70-horsepower GAZ-202 engine, the T-60 could reach 45 kilometers per hour on roads and demonstrated good mobility despite its light weight. Romanian forces found limited use for captured T-60s, as the 20mm cannon was inadequate for anti-tank combat by 1942 standards, being effective only against unarmored or lightly armored vehicles and infantry positions. However, some T-60s were incorporated into Romanian security and reconnaissance units, where their mobility and compact size proved advantageous. The relative abundance of captured ammunition and spare parts made these tanks economical to operate despite their limited combat value. T-70. The T-70 light tank, which succeeded the T-60 in Soviet production, was also captured in modest numbers by Romanian forces during 1942 and 1943. Weighing approximately 9.2 tons, the T-70 was armed with a 45mm 20K gun, the same weapon as the T-26 and BT-7, representing a significant firepower increase over the T-60. A coaxial 7.62mm DT machine gun supplemented the main armament. The T-70's armor, up to 60mm on the frontal hull, made it one of the better protected light tanks of the war, capable of resisting most anti-tank rifles and some light anti-tank guns. The tank retained the problematic two-man crew arrangement, with the commander serving as gunner and loader, severely limiting combat effectiveness. Twin GAZ-202 engines producing a combined 140 horsepower gave the T-70 good mobility, with a top speed of about 45 kilometers per hour. Romanian forces that captured T-70s generally valued them more highly than T-60s due to the superior 45mm gun, which could engage most light and some medium tanks. However, the two-man crew limitation and increasing obsolescence of the 45mm gun against newer Soviet tanks reduced the T-70's value. Romanian-operated T-70s saw service primarily in 1943 and early 1944, with some continuing in use after Romania switched sides. Panzer IV. The Panzer IV was Germany's most important tank of World War II, and Romania received a limited number of these valuable vehicles. Romanian forces operated approximately 10 to 11 Panzer IV tanks, primarily the AUSF H variant, though exact numbers and models remain subject to historical debate due to incomplete records. The Panzer IV AUSF H represented the most numerous variant of Germany's workhorse medium tank, weighing approximately 25 tons with applique armor additions. Armed with the formidable 75mm QK-40L48 gun, the Panzer IV could engage most Allied tanks on even terms, with the long 75mm capable of penetrating over 90mm of armor at 500 meters. This made it effective against Soviet T-34-76 tanks and dangerous even to heavier vehicles when engaging from advantageous positions. Two 7.92mm MG-34 machine guns provided anti-infantry capability. The tank's armor, up to 80mm on the frontal hull with additional plates, offered reasonable protection against most anti-tank guns, though the vertical armor arrangement made it vulnerable to high-velocity weapons. The five-man crew operated in relatively spacious conditions by medium tank standards, with clear role separation improving combat effectiveness. Powered by a Maybach HL 120 TRM engine, producing 300 horsepower, identical to the Panzer III, the Panzer IV could reach about 38 kilometers per hour on roads, with good cross-country mobility. Romanian tankers considered the Panzer IV the finest tank in their inventory, combining firepower, protection, and reliability in a proven combat vehicle. The sophisticated fire control system, quality optics, and well-designed crew layout made it superior to Soviet medium tanks in most respects except armor protection. However, Romania received these valuable tanks only in tiny numbers, limiting their operational impact. Romanian Panzer IVs saw service during the desperate defensive battles of 1944 as Soviet forces advanced into Romania, and after switching sides, Romania used its Panzer IVs against German forces during the liberation of Transylvania and operations in Hungary. The limited number of these tanks meant they were carefully husbanded and used in critical situations where their superior capabilities could make a difference. T-34-76. The legendary Soviet T-34 medium tank entered Romanian service through battlefield captures during the invasion of the Soviet Union, and later through official transfers after Romania switched sides. The T-34 revolutionized tank design with its combination of firepower, armor, and mobility, and Romanian encounters with these tanks during 1941 and 1942 were often disastrous for outmatched Romanian armor. However, as Romanian forces captured T-34s from disabled or abandoned Soviet vehicles, they quickly recognized the tank's superiority and incorporated them into their armored units. The T-34-76, so designated for its 76.2 mm F-34 gun, weighed approximately 26.5 tons and featured revolutionary sloped armor that provided protection equivalent to much thicker vertical plates. The frontal hull armor of 45 mm sloped at 60 degrees offered protection equivalent to approximately 90 mm vertical armor, making the T-34 nearly immune to most anti-tank guns of 1941 and 1942. The powerful 76.2 mm gun could defeat most contemporary tank armor at typical combat ranges, giving the T-34 a significant firepower advantage over German Panzer IIIs and early Panzer IVs. Two 7.62 mm DT machine guns provided anti-infantry capability. The four-man crew was cramped and lacked the role specialization of German tanks, with the commander serving as both commander and gunner, reducing combat effectiveness. However, the tank's other qualities more than compensated for this weakness. Powered by a V234 diesel engine producing 500 horsepower, the T-34 could reach 53 kilometers per hour on roads and demonstrated exceptional cross-country mobility thanks to its wide tracks, Christie suspension, and powerful engine. Romanian maintenance crews initially struggled with captured T-34s, as Soviet manufacturing tolerances and maintenance procedures differed significantly from Western European practices. However, they adapted, and Romanian-operated T-34s became increasingly common in 1942 and 1943. These tanks provided Romanian armored units with a vehicle capable of engaging German and Soviet armor on relatively equal terms. Romanian tankers appreciated the T-34's firepower, protection, and mobility, though they noted deficiencies in crew ergonomics, vision devices, and the lack of a dedicated gunner. After Romania switched sides in August 1944, the Romanian armored forces received official transfers of T-34-76 tanks from the Soviet Union to supplement captured vehicles and replace losses. Romanian T-34s saw extensive combat against German forces during the liberation of Transylvania and operations in Hungary and Czechoslovakia. The T-34's ruggedness and reliability proved invaluable during these campaigns, and Romanian crews became proficient operators of this famous tank. Some sources indicate Romania operated several dozen T-34-76 tanks by the end of the war, making it one of the more numerous types in service despite having started the war as an enemy vehicle. T-34-85. The improved T-34-85, featuring a larger three-man turret and more powerful 85mm gun, entered Romanian service after the country switched sides in 1944. The Soviet Union provided T-34-85 tanks to Romania as part of efforts to rebuild Romanian armored forces for operations against Germany. The T-34-85 addressed many of the T-34-76's shortcomings while retaining its excellent mobility and protection. Weighing approximately 32 tons, the T-34-85 was armed with a powerful 85mm Zenz S-53 gun, capable of penetrating over 100 millimeters of armor at 1,000 meters, making it effective against all but the heaviest German tanks. The larger turret accommodated a 5-man crew, with separate commander and gunner positions, significantly improving combat effectiveness. Two 7.62mm DT machine guns provided anti-infantry capability. The tank's armor remained unchanged from the T-34-76, with 45mm to 90mm of sloped armor, providing excellent protection against most weapons. The same V234 diesel engine powered the heavier tank, resulting in slightly reduced top speed of about 50 kilometers per hour, though cross-country mobility remained excellent. Romanian forces received T-34-85s in modest numbers during late 1944 and early 1945, with these tanks seeing service during the final campaigns in Hungary, Austria, and Czechoslovakia. Romanian tankers universally preferred the T-34-85 to the earlier model, citing improved firepower, better crew arrangement, and superior combat effectiveness. The T-34-85 represented Romania's most capable tank during the final year of the war, though numerical strength remained limited compared to the massive Soviet armored forces operating alongside Romanian units. Heavy tanks. Tiger I Romania's association with the famous German Tiger I heavy tank is tenuous and poorly documented, but some evidence suggests Romanian forces operated one or possibly two Tiger I tanks during 1944. The Tiger I, weighing 57 tons and armed with the legendary 80mm QK-36 L-56 gun, was the most feared tank of the mid-war period, capable of destroying any Allied tank at ranges beyond the effective reach of their guns. The Tiger I's armor, up to 100mm thick on the frontal surfaces and arranged in vertical plates, could resist most Allied anti-tank weapons when engaged from the front. The 5-man crew operated one of the war's most sophisticated tanks, with excellent optics, fire control, and crew ergonomics. Powered by a Maybach HL230 P45 engine producing 700 horsepower, the Tiger I could reach about 38 kilometers per hour on roads, though its 57-ton weight stressed the suspension and transmission, leading to frequent mechanical problems. Romanian connection to the Tiger likely came through German units operating in Romania, or possibly through a small number of vehicles transferred or captured. If Romanian crews operated Tiger I tanks, it was in extremely limited numbers and for a short period during 1944. The complexity of the Tiger I's maintenance and repair requirements would have challenged Romanian maintenance capabilities, and ammunition supply would have been problematic. The evidence for Romanian Tiger I operations remains controversial among historians, with some arguing the association is a myth, while others point to fragmentary documentary and photographic evidence. Regardless of the truth, any Romanian operation of Tiger I tanks would have been exceptional rather than routine, involving perhaps a single vehicle or small number for a brief period. Captured KV-1. During the initial invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941, Romanian forces encountered the formidable Soviet KV-1 heavy tank, which proved nearly invulnerable to most Romanian and German anti-tank weapons available at that time. While German forces captured and operated some KV-1 tanks, Romanian forces also captured at least a few of these massive vehicles. The KV-1 weighed approximately 47 tons and was armed with a 76.2mm ZIS-5 gun, supplemented by three 7.62mm DT machine guns. The tank's armor, up to 90mm thick on the frontal surfaces, made it nearly impervious to most anti-tank guns of 1941, and early encounters with KV-1s often resulted in panic among Axis forces. The 5-man crew operated in cramped conditions typical of Soviet heavy tanks, with limited visibility and poor crew ergonomics. Powered by a V2K diesel engine producing 600 horsepower, the KV-1 could reach about 35 kilometers per hour on roads, though mechanical reliability was problematic. Romanian forces that captured KV-1s faced significant challenges in operating them, as the vehicles required specialized maintenance, consumed large quantities of fuel, and needed ammunition that was difficult to obtain once captured stocks were exhausted. Any Romanian operation of KV-1 tanks was limited and short-lived, though they may have been used for propaganda purposes or local security duties before being abandoned due to maintenance difficulties. Armored cars and reconnaissance vehicles, AB-41. While not technically a tank, the Italian AB-41 armored car deserves mention as it provided Romanian forces with armored reconnaissance capability. Romania received a small number of these vehicles from Italy, possibly 3 to 5 units. The AB-41 was a four-wheeled armored car weighing approximately 7.5 tons, armed with a 20mm Breda 35 automatic cannon and coaxial 8mm machine gun and a small turret. Additional 8mm machine guns were mounted in the hull. The armor, up to 18mm thick, provided protection against small arms and shell fragments. The four-man crew consisted of commander, gunner, driver, and assistant driver. Powered by a 90-horsepower engine, the AB-41 could reach 80 kilometers per hour on roads, making it much faster than tanks but limited to prepared surfaces. Romanian forces employed AB-41 armored cars for reconnaissance and security duties, taking advantage of their speed on roads while accepting their limited cross-country mobility and light armament. OA Verzender 30, Romania operated the Czechoslovak OA Verzender 30 armored car, which it acquired along with the LT Verzend 35 tanks. This four-wheeled armored car weighed approximately 3.5 tons and was armed with two 7.92mm ZB Verzend 26 light machine guns in a rotating turret. The armor, only 6mm thick, provided minimal protection, sufficient only against rifle-caliber ammunition. The three-man crew operated a vehicle powered by a 50-horsepower engine that could reach about 65 kilometers per hour on roads. The OA Verzend 30's lightweight allowed for better cross-country mobility than heavier armored cars, though it was still primarily roadbound. Romanian forces used these vehicles for reconnaissance and liaison duties during the early war period. The story of Romanian tanks during World War II is one of adaptation, improvisation, and the harsh realities of being a secondary power in total war. From the obsolete French Renault FT-17s that should have been museum pieces to the capable T-34-85s received after switching sides, Romanian armored forces operated an incredible diversity of equipment under difficult circumstances. Romania entered the war with a small collection of obsolete light tanks, acquired more capable vehicles through German assistance in battlefield captures, developed indigenous tank destroyers to address critical capability gaps, and eventually received modern Soviet equipment after changing sides. Throughout this evolution, Romanian tankers demonstrated courage and skill, fighting in some of the war's most brutal battles from the steppes of Ukraine to the mountains of Transylvania. The industrial limitations that prevented Romania from producing tanks in significant numbers also drove innovation in converting captured equipment and developing indigenous designs like the Marischal tank destroyer. Romanian engineers and workers accomplished remarkable feats with limited resources, creating effective fighting vehicles from captured chassis and available weapons. The diversity of Romanian tank forces created immense logistical challenges, with multiple calibers of ammunition, different spare parts requirements, and varying maintenance procedures complicating operations. Yet Romanian mechanics and logistics personnel somehow kept this diverse fleet operational under combat conditions. The Romanian experience with tanks during World War II offers important lessons about the challenges facing secondary powers in modern warfare, the importance of industrial capacity in sustaining military operations, and the value of adaptability and improvisation when facing material shortages. Romanian armored forces never achieved the numerical strength or technological sophistication of major combatants, but they made significant contributions to Axis operations on the Eastern Front and later Allied operations against Germany. The tankers who crewed these diverse vehicles, whether Romanian R-35s attacking across the steppes in 1941, captured T-34s defending against Soviet advances in 1944, or Soviet-supplied T-34-85s liberating Transylvania, wrote an important chapter in their nation's military history. Today, surviving examples of Romanian tanks from World War II are rare, with most having been destroyed in combat, scrapped after the war, or lost to history.